My name is Rabbi Levi Dubov from Chabad of Bloomfield Hills. I want to welcome all of you to Survival of a Nation, our summer course. And the summer courses are interesting because summer is a tough time to get people to commit to want to lock down sometime, whether it's daytime or evening time. People are out of town, you know, it's not like when the winter or things are anyways a little bit sleepy, you could sign up for a 6-week course. So I always tell my wife, Mushki, you know, we're launching a summer course. We're either going to get 5 people or we're going to have 70 people. I have no clue. Well, but you know what? There's for sure one person who wants to study in the summer. So we're going to do a summer course. And thank God we are holding at, I believe, somewhere around close to 50 registrations for this course. So I want to first of all welcome all of you. Thank you all for joining. And God willing, it's going to be a wonderful ride. And I'm happy that you're all here. I want to begin tonight by thanking our course sponsors who's made this course possible, to Nancy Trias, Beth and Eli Morocco, and Toby and Larry Fox. Thank you all for helping us bring this course here to the community. Thank you. And may God bless you all. Such a beautiful topic, such a beautiful course, so beautiful having all of us here together, whether virtually or in person. And Israel, this is very, very big. 55 years ago, almost to the date, you know, spring 55 years ago, 1967, was a very pivotal moment in not just Israeli history, but really Jewish history. It was a watershed moment. So much has changed. And that's what we want to do in today's class. And in the next 6 weeks. Over the next 6 weeks, we're going to take 6 days, stretch it out to 6 weeks, like only Jews know how to do. And we maximize. You know, Israel's a small land. We maximize the potential. You know, the joke goes that a Texan politician in the early years of the state of Israel's establishment visits this new state of Israel, and they visit a kibbutz. And he goes and meets a farmer, and this Israeli, who was probably more Russian, Eastern European, is showing off his farm. He says, "Look over here. Here I got my little chicken coop, and here's where we grow our cucumbers and tomatoes." And he has this little kibbutz farm. And this Texan lawmaker says, or Southern lawmaker, he says, "This is what you got? This is it?" He's like, "Yeah." And the kibbutznik is so proud. He's showing off his farm. And the Texan rancher, he says, "Back in Texas, I've got a farm that I could get into my tractor in the morning at one end. I could drive to the other end, and I still won't reach the other end." That's a farm. So the Israeli looks at him and says, looks at him very sympathetically and says, "Oh, don't worry. I once had a tractor like that also." So we maximize it. So this is the agenda for the course. And then we'll jump into today's topic, God willing. We're going to be going through the story of the Six-Day War. And specifically, each class is slowly going to take us through the story. We're going to watch the story part via video, a mini documentary that will slowly be playing out over the next 6 weeks. But we're going to allow the history to inform us of ideas. This is not a history class, although we will be talking a lot about history. Ultimately, this is a class about ideas. What Judaism teaches about these ideas, about Israel, about survival, especially in a very contemporary and relevant perspective. So that's what we're going to do. Start from the beginning of the story and see what what ideas, what challenges, what controversies the story brings up. And we're going to go and plunge into that. And that said, I need to tell you, this is my most controversial course I've ever done. And for those of you who know me, I'm not a controversial type of guy. I'm not here to hit that raw nerve, but this course is probably gonna hit some raw nerves. And we're all very passionate about these topics. And actually tonight's class, you know, for lesson 1, I didn't want to go all the way in the deep end. You know, we'll ease in slowly. It's not gonna be that controversial, but already next week, we're going straight in for some pretty big controversial topics in lesson 4 and lesson 5. So here's how we're gonna do it. I want this to be a very safe space. I don't want anybody to ever feel that tension of being challenged personally. We're not here, you know, nobody here has to toe the line. And I also want that whenever there's a discussion over here, it should be a very, very enjoyable and comfortable atmosphere. We're going to study specifically what Judaism has to say. I'm not going to give you political talking points. I'm not a politician. I'm not a political analyst, or we're not going to be doing socio-political analysis over here. But we look at what Judaism has to say about all these issues, which is unique because too often today we're hearing different sides of the debate, but we're not hearing what Judaism is saying. Sometimes Judaism is actually going to surprise us. It's not going to be what we think. What does some old religion have to say about this? It's going to be very fresh. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be nuanced. So God willing, it's going to be a beautiful journey. It's a 6-day war, 1967, 55 years later, 2022. What do you guys say? What relevance does the 6-day war have for us today? What do you say? Anyone have any thoughts? And if you're on Zoom, feel free to jump in. Hopefully everybody could hear you. But what do you say? Jerusalem. Okay. Give us a little bit more. So first of all, Jerusalem, right? This is the moment. My uncle told me a story. I was not alive 55 years ago. But my uncle, who was, he just once told me this little anecdote. There was a Jewish reporter who worked for the New York Times, but her last name was not Jewish sounding at all. It was like Anglo-Saxon last name. So she was a photojournalist. She was going to the Middle East, this before the 6-day war, I think a year before, 1966. And she goes and she asked to do some picture journalism in the old city of Jerusalem, in eastern Jerusalem. And Jordanian guards escort her through in the old city. And she was able to go to the temple, to the Western Wall. She hid her emotions. No one knew that she was a Jew. It was very dangerous to be a Jew in that neck of the woods. And she captured some photos of the Western Wall, which then Jews had no access to. And she came back to the States, and she goes to my uncle's house. He was a child then. And I'm not related, he married into the family, my uncle. And here this reporter brought as a gift a framed picture of the Western Wall. And my uncle says, he was 11 years old at the time, he says that his father took the picture and started crying. It was so dear to him just to see a picture of the Western Wall. And he hung it up right in the center of the dining room so that anytime the family gathers in the dining room, they'll see the Western Wall. Jews never even dreamt that we'll ever have a chance to see this again. And all of a sudden, in 6 days, all of a sudden we have it again. So this whole idea that we feel this close connection to Israel, we go to the Western Wall, that's definitely something that's come about because of the 6-day war. So there you go. That's that about how important this topic is. What else? What do you say? Especially from a contemporary perspective. What's pressing about this war? Yes, Max. Rise up and kill first. Should I do my signature?
Oh.
Should I give my signature? Lesson 2? Lesson 2. But yeah, which means how do Jews fight wars? That's a very important thing. Especially today, we're talking about Israel. Israel's still facing the challenges. Okay, let's get 1 or 2 more ideas. Yes.
The conquest of the Sinai gave Israel some bargaining chips to get to a cold peace, at least with Egypt, and which started perhaps more normalization in the region.
Very good. So that was really the first peace treaty done with Egypt. And so the whole idea of peace with some of the Arab neighbors, which only began after the war, Israel started that right after, negotiating with Egypt, and they gave back the entire Sinai. And that is lesson 4, land for peace. In general, peace. What is going on there for decades and decades and decades? We're fighting over 100 years, really. What's the end game here? What's the end game? And what is the proper thing to do? What's not the proper thing? And land for peace is definitely a big part of that. Very good. Okay, and just to give you also, you spoke about Jerusalem, that's lesson 3. Okay. Yes, Sheldon, let's do one more.
More basic perspective is Israel's facing destruction, extinction, genocide.
Israel is facing extinction, that's right. And so you're saying that's...
God wasn't.
And God saved us.
I suppose it's also that a
major point in the struggles we're facing today with the Palestinian issue. I think that's
Right, really the whole, right, until then it was known as the Israeli-Arab conflict. The whole idea of it being a Palestinian conflict only started really after the war, because that's when we also conquered or occupied, depending who you ask, which
Right.
verbiage you use. Right, that's a stressful thing, which word do you use? But that started then.
Left that the population in a lurch.
Right. So that's when Israel all of a sudden goes into the West Bank, into Gaza, into the Golan Heights. So again, these are really themes that even though 55 years ago is when they first erupted or were highlighted strongly 55 years ago, these are very fresh things. They're still in the news today. We're still debating them. We're still talking about them. These are still very, very close to us. Yes. You have your hand up? No? Okay.
Well, I think overall, we're all changing, especially Jews in the United States, Israel was just something that existed. There was no real relationship with Israel, but all of a sudden they see Israel as a major, not warrior, but major, to win a conflict like this in just 6 days.
Became a big player. All of a sudden, right, Israel went from just being this small, little, vulnerable place to all of a sudden being something the entire world recognized. And here we are. So without any further ado, let us do our video.
The 6 days of warfare in 1967 between Israel and its Arab neighbors are legendary for the staggering speed and fury of Israel's military victory. But the dreadful days of rage and trepidation leading to the outbreak of hostilities were no less dramatic. The Arab nations refused to accept Israel's presence. To the Arab mind, the humiliation of their defeat in 1948 could be removed only by soaking the Holy Land in the blood of its Jewish inhabitants. In the months before June 1967, calls for Israel's annihilation swelled into a hysterical battle cry on the streets of every Arab country in the Middle East. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser stood at the heart of this incitement. A charismatic leader with appeal across the Arab world, Nasser campaigned for Arab unity and for the military destruction of Israel. His blood-curdling speeches were broadcast to every Arab nation, inflaming populations and shaping anti-Israel policy. Israel was a precarious sliver of land along the Mediterranean sand, barely 12 miles wide at her waist, and dwarfed by colossal foes in every direction. Egypt growled to her south, Jordan menaced her eastern border, and Syria rained mortars onto her north. These three nations commanded formidable standing armies and boasted hundreds of modern tanks, aircrafts, and artillery units. Additional Arab countries were prepared to offer varying degrees of commitment to any war against Israel, ranging from symbolic support to actual pilots, planes, tanks, and troops. Foremost among these were Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Kuwait, and Lebanon. Behind these loomed a larger foe, the Soviet Union, which armed and advised many of the Arab governments. Israel leaned on the support of a heavyweight but half-hearted ally, the United States of America. But President Lyndon B. Johnson, who took office in 1963, mired as he was in the Vietnam War, was more concerned with de-escalating the Cold War than addressing Israel's existential concerns. It was the Soviets who extended a lit match to the Arab powder keg that erupted in the 1967 Six-Day War. On May 13, 1967, the Soviets supplied Egypt with false intelligence, claiming that Israel has mobilized to invade Syria. They urge Egypt to take action, and in the first act of aggression, Nasser rolls his enormous Egyptian army into the Sinai Peninsula towards Israel's southern border. the Arab world erupts in euphoric celebrations and calls to slaughter the Jews. Nasser becomes an instant hero. Israel and the UN publicly clarify that Israel has not mobilized against Syria, but Nasser responds on May 15th by ordering the UN peacekeeping force that forms a buffer between Egypt and Israel to withdraw from Sinai. Israel's government is thrown into panic. UN Secretary-General U Thant unilaterally orders his peacekeepers to comply with Nasser's demand. On May 19th, to Israel's horror and to the world's astonishment, the UN emergency force vanishes, leaving Israel exposed to a vast Egyptian force that would swell in just 3 days to some 80,000 troops and 600 tanks. Israel orders a large-scale mobilization of its army reserves and issues a stern warning that should Egypt close the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, Israel will consider it an act of war and react accordingly. Meanwhile, the Arab world escalates its rhetoric. On May 18th, Cairo Radio broadcasts the following message.
Every one of the 100 million Arabs has been living for the past 19 years on one hope: to live to see the day Israel is liquidated. There is no life, no peace, nor hope for the gangs of Zionism to remain in the occupied land. As of today, there no longer exists the UN International Emergency Force to protect Israel. The sole method we shall apply against Israel is a total war, which will result in the extermination of Zionist existence.
On May 20th, Syria's defense minister, Hafez Assad, declares,
Our forces are now entirely ready not only to repulse any aggression, but to initiate the act ourselves and to explode the Zionist presence in the Arab homeland of Palestine. The Syrian army, with its finger on the trigger, is united. I believe that the time has come to begin a battle of annihilation.
And then it happened. On May 23rd, Egypt blockaded the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping in an act of war under international law. Israel's oil supply route is now cut off. No nation has rallied to Israel's cause. Meir Amit, head of the Israeli Mossad, later recalled the tense days before the outbreak of the war.
In the middle of the night, I received a visit from the CIA representative in Israel who said to me, "If you shoot first, you will stand alone in this battle."
Israel's military, intelligence, and civil leadership anticipate the worst. With Israeli men drafted into the army, the economy falters. Life grinds to a standstill. Students, housewives, and children dig trenches, build shelters, and volunteer for essential services. Anticipating record loss of life, Israel designates parks as mass cemeteries. A spirit of despair settles over the country's 2 million Jews, who whisper with dread of a second Holocaust. But Nasser is upbeat. He is ready for war. On May 26th, Nasser addresses the General Council of the International Confederation of Arab Trade Unions.
We are ready to enter a general war with Israel. The battle will be a general one, and our basic objective will be to destroy Israel.
On May 30th, King Hussein of Jordan signs a defense treaty with Egypt, placing the Jordanian army under Egyptian command. The Egyptian-Syrian-Jordanian axis is now complete. Ahmed Shukeri, chairman of the PLO in Jordanian Jerusalem, is asked in a June 1st news interview what will happen to the Israelis if there is a war. His response?
Those who survive will remain in Palestine. I estimate that none of them will survive.
The Arab military buildup continues. Egypt has 100,000 troops and 930 tanks in the Sinai, and another 110,000 soldiers and 450 combat aircraft on notice. Syria has 63,000 troops, and Jordan 55,000. Israel's mostly civilian army is absurdly outnumbered in manpower, weaponry, planes, tanks, and artillery. Slightly more than 2 decades after the Holocaust, and less than 20 years since the United Nations resolution that authorized the Jewish people to create a state in their ancient homeland, the world had turned its back on the Jewish state and its population of survivors. There was no response to the Arab claim that the Jewish people are interlopers in their own land and have no right to the biblical land of Israel.
This is phase one. Phase one, what the Jews are facing. There's utter horror for the Jewish people in Israel. Throughout the world, there's even tremendous sympathy, right? We're not used to this today. For those of you who were around then, the world was very sympathetic to the Israeli cause. In the streets of New York, there was support for Israel because everybody understood, you know. It was a nice run for 19 years. You guys have had a state, but it's over. You know, you picked the wrong neighborhood. Like there's a joke. The joke goes that 6 days of creation, and God creates this beautiful piece of land, right, in the Middle East, and he tells the angels, beautiful, everything is in this land, deserts and greenery and beaches and cliffs, everything is here. The land of milk and honey. And when you give it to the Jews, the angels tell God, aren't you giving them a little bit of too much of a good bargain? He says, oh, just wait till you see what neighbors I give them. All right. But really, if we want to begin the journey of what is the first issue, the first topic that this war brings up is the Jewish claim to the land of Israel. And that is something that we look 55 years and not much has changed. Both in the Middle East and the Arab community, there is no sense of acceptance of the right of the Jews to be on this land. You will not find an Arab who will admit that that the Jews have a right to be here, just find some peaceful way to smoothen out our issues. No, and even the world, that's the biggest thing, even the international community. You know, today it's very accepted to say this is controversial. We don't know if the Jews are allowed to be there, right? There's all these things. And currently, what we all know, sadly, on college campuses, the in vogue thing, right? The accepted narrative is anti-Israel. The BDS movement is the accepted thing. So this is really the very first thing which we have to address. What is the Jewish claim to the land of Israel? This was the premise of the 6 Day War. This is still a premise till today. And not only is it a premise till today, it's a premise for this whole course. Because if we as Jews want to start going through the specific issues, they're going to come up in lesson 2 and lesson 3 and lesson 4 and lesson 5 and lesson 6. You know, land for peace, how we should defend the land of Israel, our perspective of the land of Israel. We need to begin with the premise, with the foundation, which is, what is our way? What are we doing here? You know, in 2002, Israel was suffering then from the Second Intifada, horrible time. I was still young in 2002. This is like, I'm like growing up as a kid and I'm hearing about these daily attacks. And I definitely have like some trauma in my head. When I was 13, I went to Israel and I was like, all that like trauma like 10 years before, there's like attacks every day and who knows, can't go anywhere. It was very fresh in me. So in 2002, the UN Secretary General then, Kofi Annan, if that's how you pronounce his name, he said, and then the whole world, the international community was just so against Israel, no matter what Israel did, and Israel started to defend itself. They launched some type of operation then, and just, of course, Israel's being heavily criticized. And he says, is it possible that the whole world is wrong and only Israel's right? And that's like, that becomes part of the, and even, you start to see that today we sometimes take it for granted. Jews support Israel. Of course we support Israel. And then what we're seeing is today Jews are sometimes starting to doubt themselves. When the whole world is telling you that your narrative is false, you say, 1 second, maybe I have it wrong. What really is our claim to the land of Israel? So let's not take it for granted. Let's explore it. What is the claim to the land of Israel? This is very, very important that we have a proper perspective as we go through the rest of this course. So the easy place to begin is in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. The Declaration of Independence, you can still go to the Independence Hall in Tel Aviv. You can see the very room where they announced and where Ben Gurion read out of the scroll the Declaration of Independence. It lays out in that scroll the arguments for the Jewish right to the land of Israel. What are we doing here? Alan Dershowitz, I once read from him that all the early Zionist leaders were a bunch of lawyers. So they, and by the way, Prime Minister Eshkol, who was the Prime Minister of Israel in 1967, he was a lawyer. He wasn't that, he didn't know how to do wars. He was very scared in general. We'll talk about that in some of the later classes. He was very timid. He didn't understand how to do war. The last thing he wanted was war. He's a lawyer. He's a man of ideas. That was his comfort zone. So in the Declaration of Independence, it lays out 3 reasons, 3 claims. What are our rights? What is our right? The 3 claims briefly, and then we're going to go through them a little bit more in depth. One is a historical claim to the land of Israel. One is a legal right to the land of Israel. And one is called Jewish survival. That's like more of an emotional one. So let me just set this side over here. 3 arguments that are laid out in the Declaration of Independence: historical, legal, and a survival argument. I want to go through these arguments with you. And let's keep our eyes open. Let's keep our minds open. Let's think a little bit about what are the limitations of each of these arguments. How good are these arguments? And what could be some counter arguments? Let's begin with the historical argument. By the way, this is Rachel's tomb, which you can still visit today in Beis Lechem in Bethlehem, the West Bank. This is Lord Balfour. Look at that. Jewish survival. These are Jews right after the Holocaust arriving on Israeli soil, 1945. Buchenwald survivors. That's unbelievable. Let's begin with the historical argument. Historical argument. Let us do some readings. And by the way, if you didn't get a book, we got books there in the back. Did everybody get a book? Okay. And I mentioned this earlier, but we sold out of books. I need to make an order tomorrow from the printer to get by next week some more books. So I need to know, by the way, of those of you on Zoom, if you did not get a book, make sure to email me so that I know how many to order. It's a little confused sometimes. I don't know if people took 1 book or 2 books. The point is just let me know. It's like that for next week. We can make sure that everybody has. Let's begin. We're going to do some readings. The way we do it, for those of you who are new here, we go around giving everybody a chance to do some of the readings. If you don't want to read, don't read. Just pass on to the person next to you. Only in English. If the text has Hebrew, we also include the Hebrew because we want to keep the authentic wording and the authentic source in the book as well. This is an interesting source from the book of Maccabees, which is an interesting ancient text. And the context of this text, we're going to go to text 6, jumping over to text 6. And by the way, there's lots of good stuff in your book, additional text, additional readings. You could have a lot of fun with your book, and I definitely encourage you to take advantage of that. Text 6. This is a text that records right after the Hanukkah story. So we all know the Maccabees, this band of brothers, rise up against the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks. There's multiple Greek empires that are in conflict and competing with each other. So the Seleucid Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, and they take over the land of Israel. They conquer the land of Israel, reclaim it, and this is part of the narrative afterwards. There's still some tension between the Jews who have just recently reconquered the land of Israel and their different Greek neighboring empires. And this is what Shimon, Simon, which is actually one of the 5 Maccabee brothers. Brother number 2 is Shimon, Simon. So this is something that Simon says to one of the Syrian officials, actually from Antiochus, the emperor himself of the Syrian Greeks. And this is what Simon tells him. Let us begin. Let's begin on my right. Your name is Barbara. Would you like to read? Read it loud and clear. Text 6, here we go.
It is not a foreign land that we can conquer.
So start from the previous paragraph. Simon, you see that?
Simon answered, myself.
All right, for those of you on Zoom, it's possibly not going to be able to hear. Just follow along in the book. I'll always make sure to tell you what text it is. But, okay. So Simon says something we can all relate to. We are not interlopers. We have not conquered this land. We have not robbed this land from anybody else. This is our ancestral homeland. And anybody that we have conquered it from, they've unjustly conquered it from us. And this is the first argument that we see as an argument we've been saying for close to 2,000 years. Simon lives 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago. We are not walking into a piece of land and saying, let's conquer it, because why not? We're just looking to expand our empire. This is our land. And today there's not a single serious historian which will deny the Jewish claim, the ancestral bond that the Jews have with the Holy Land. This piece of land, this is where over 3,000 years, 3,800 years of Jewish history happens. King David, King Solomon, the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, the Second Jewish Commonwealth, the Hasmonean dynasty. These are all documented historical facts, and especially today, this is being corroborated by archaeological evidence. So this is our land. Okay, so let's put this up over here. The historical argument, and just by the way, here's a few interesting things. This is something that was found in Israel, a little fragment over here. And it says on this little stone, which is historical evidence of King David. I'm not sure exactly what it is. It says House of David. That's what it says over there in the ancient, in the years 907 to 837 BCE. I'm talking about 3,000 years ago.
And the fact is that it wasn't a Jewish or Hebrew victory still. It was a battle that Israel or Judah had lost,
So it was something that we lost.
or at least that someone claimed we lost.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the background of this. Okay, but there's one thing. This is actually very, very interesting. This is believed to be a part of the Second Temple. I want to tell you this briefly. So it's on one side of the Western Wall is actually a very small section, a tiny section. If you go to the Western Wall in Israel, when you see the Western Wall, that's only a tiny little section of the wall that surrounded the Temple Mount. And on one side, you can clearly see, until today you have it, there's tremendous rubble. When the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, they literally just took boulders and threw it over the wall. And it's still there on the bottom of the wall, tremendous amount of rubble. And on many of them, you can literally see evidence that this is from the Second Holy Temple. So they found this there and they took it away. They put it in a museum now. But this was a fragment that was found right at the foot of the wall surrounding the Temple Mount. And if you look at it, it says over here, the stone says, to the trumpeting place, found at the foot of the Temple Mount. And you see over here, Lebeit Hatkiyah, and there's a few other words which are cut off. And what's interesting is the Jews blew shofar quite often from the Temple Mount. Specifically, just to show you how often Jews did this, every single Friday, as it was almost sundown, there would be some of the Kohanim, some of the high priests would go to this little corner building at the corner of the Temple Mount and blow the shofar, say that everybody in Jerusalem knows Shabbos is about to be here. So if you go to Jerusalem today, you'll hear there are these sirens, right, before Shabbos. Where does that come from? Why do Jews? It comes from here. So there was a special place, a little house, with a little patio up on top. You go to the roof of it, you blow the shofar. That was the designated shofar blowing place. Anytime that we blew shofar as a service, not just Rosh Hashanah. Again, there were many, many times where blowing shofar was part of the daily schedule or the weekly schedule, seasonal schedule of life in ancient Jerusalem. And here we have it, a sign that's literally telling you this is the way to go. So that's one piece of evidence. And here's one more from a little bit later, from 132 to 135 CE. We're not going to go to the whole history over there, but there's a small little time. Look at page 11, by the way. Page 11, you have a timeline of the Jewish presence in Israel. And you'll see when there was Jewish sovereignty, when there was non-Jewish sovereignty, when the temple stood. This gives you a little bit of an idea. But if you look just about at the center, there's a small little line that goes across where it says there's a brief Jewish independence during the Bar Kokhba revolt. At a certain point, even after the Roman conquest, Bar Kokhba led a Jewish revolt, and they, for a very small amount of time, were able to reclaim the land of Israel, and they minted coins, and we have that coin here. This is a coin from the Bar Kokhba period, and what did they put on the coin? The temple that was just destroyed, because that's what they were nostalgic for, right? We're nostalgic for George Washington, so we put him on our bills, right? And they were nostalgic for the Holy Temple. So look at this, they put the facade of the Holy Temple. And these are just all part of, here we see there's archaeological evidence, solid evidence. I just saw yesterday an article how they just found right at the foot of the Holy Temple a brand new mikveh. They found the mikveh that before going on Temple Mount, you would go to the mikveh. So they just found this every single day. They're finding new things. And that is this argument. We Jews have an ancient tie to this homeland. And one last fact, and a lot of people don't know this. Ever since over 3,000 years ago, 3,300 years ago, when the Jews left Egypt and entered into the promised land after 40 years of wandering in the desert, like we all know, there never once was a time that the land of Israel did not have Jews living in it. Maybe there were only a few thousand Jews. Never once was there a break, and this is documented, somebody has done all the research. In every single era, Jews have always lived in Israel, at least a small population. Jews are always there. So in a certain way, you could say, it's our ancestral homeland, we've never given up on it, and we've always been there. We've always had somebody there on the ground to represent all of us, the rest of us who are in diaspora. There's a, I believe it's called the Diaspora Museum in Israel, and they have a picture of a family that lives in the Galilee of Israel. And they have on record that their family lived in this exact same village all the way up till the first temple times, 2,500 years ago. So like unbelievable. They have record, we're here for 2,500 years, we've never left. And that is this argument. Let's read that in the Declaration of Independence from Israel, page 12. And again, if you are on Zoom, the microphone will try to pick it up, but it may not. But here we go, Marion. Give us a read.
The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. In 1897, at the summons of the spiritual father of the Jewish state, Theodor Herzl, the first Zionist Congress convened and proclaimed the right of the Jewish people to national rebirth in its own country.
There you have it. This is our land, historical roots, and we're simply here to come back to our ancestral homeland. That's the argument. How do you like this argument? Sounds good?
By itself, it doesn't stand up.
Oh, okay, very good. By itself, it doesn't stand, it doesn't hold what? Why?
Well, if we took that to its extreme, then we would have to give back the United States, the Native Americans.
There you have it. You know, do we have to give the Alamo back to Mexico and the whole southwestern America back to the back to you know, the Native Americans, and then Mexico? And do the Dutch get to come back and take New York City? You know, as you say, flush here. To what level? How far does this go?
Rabbi?
Yes.
This is all well and good, I think, if you're Jewish and you look at it like that. But if I wasn't Jewish, and I was in the surrounding countries, I don't think that would mean much to me, that argument.
Right. So
just the fact that they were there. I don't think that would mean much to a non-Jew.
Joel is saying that this is a good argument for Jews, but to get the world behind this is not necessarily going to work. We could appreciate this, but the way it works in the world is lands get conquered and life moves on, right?
Yeah. Rabbi, also a comment here too.
Yes.
Where do Judea and Samaria fit into this historical perspective as well?
Okay, that's a good question. Judea and Samaria is already a detail. And we'll actually be talking about that in lesson 4. I should mention, because you're actually saying a very good point. All these arguments also touch upon the idea of territory, Palestinian state, land for peace. So I do want to mention that right now we're just giving arguments to the general essential bond between Jewish people in the land of Israel. The specifics, which definitely all this has to be re-examined and reassessed once we get to some of the specifics to the, we're going to do that in lesson 4.
Okay.
Good point, Eli. Okay, so we have one counter argument here, or one weakness in the argument, which is that's not the way the world works. It's beautiful that you once lived here, move on with life. Okay. Another argument, and we Jews don't hide behind this, it's clearly in the Bible. We all say that we conquered the land. Who do we conquer the land from? From the Canaanites. Who are the Canaanites today? There's a new argument. The Palestinians say that they're the ancient Canaanites. All right, not true, but that's another thing. But theoretically, could the ancient Canaanites come back and say, well, we were the original inhabitants of this land? So we get, again, that's just a theoretical argument on this line of thinking. Okay, I'm not saying it's a bad argument. I'm just trying to point out the weaknesses of it. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Yes, Max.
There are other people at almost all times that live there also.
Other people could also claim that they have an ancestral bond with the land, which is indeed one of the arguments of the Arabs. I'll tell you something interesting. My uncle, a different uncle, he's the Chabad rabbi in Charlotte, North Carolina. So he told me that he was once at a gas station and a car pulls up near him and this very handsome, dark-skinned young man comes out and says, Salam Alaikum, the Arabic. So he says a Jewish Ashkenazic, Shalom Aleichem back. And they get into this conversation, where are you from? And he comes from Palestine, from the West Bank. And they have a talk, and this young man says, we could talk here, and we can make small talk. We could get along here. Why can't we get along in the Middle East? And they talk, and my uncle tells this young Palestinian man, he's an American, but I guess his parents are from the West Bank. He says, that's interesting, because I was not born in Israel, but my family goes way back, and my great-grandparents have moved to the city of Hebron in the early 1800s, in the 1820s. They moved from Eastern Europe, and they've come and settled in Hebron. And this young man says, well, that's not possible. That's not possible. He says, I also come from right near Hebron, but Jews only started coming in the 1920s. So there's no way that your family was there in the 1820s already. So uncle didn't tell him this, but he's like, that's the reason why we can't get along. We can't even, you're not willing to admit on the facts that we've always been there. And there have been settlements of Jews, especially in the 1800s. There have been many, many communities that have moved down, small pockets of Jews who've gone to settle the land of Israel. Anyways, this is the historical argument. And the challenge to this, the weakness of it is, okay, so you have historical roots here. Does that give you the right to take it back? Okay, that's the argument. Let's now move on to reason number 2 from the Declaration of Independence. Number 2 is international law. Where does it come from that Jews are lawyers? Where does it come from? Because it's true. Okay, not all Jews, but a lot of Jews. We have a bunch of lawyers here. Okay, I'm not a lawyer. I disappointed my parents, but it's okay. All right. Maybe one of my brothers will give them nachas one day. Okay, now so, and the founding fathers of Israel, many of them were as well lawyers, and they've actually went to great pains, to great lengths, to make sure that the founding of Israel was done on very, very solid legal premises, that it should be strongly supported by international law. More than really any other country in existence, Israel has the most elements of legal weight behind its existence. This is not a time to go through all the details, but just very, very briefly, if you want to understand the international legal support of the land of Israel. So here's international law argument. So Israel, okay, let's go back, starting from the 1500s, is ruled by the Ottoman Empire. All right. The Ottoman Empire basically falls apart, in the early 1900s. After World War I, the Middle East is split between the British and the French, and it comes that in 1917, the Britons have control over much of the Middle East, including what was then called Palestine. Okay, so right away, when the British have control over Palestine, what was then called Palestine. By the way, who called this piece of land Palestine? Any of you know? The Romans. After the Romans conquested Israel, they wanted to kind of really, they wanted to humiliate the Jews and to hurt, to really dig it in. And so they changed it from the land of Israel to Palestine, which was based on the ancient Plishtim, which lived in southern Israel, which were an enemy of the Jewish people. And that was a way to really dig into the Jews. We're going to wipe off your memory from this place. So they're the ones who call it Palestine, but it's really an artificial name. It's not. So 1917, Lord Balfour, that's Mr. Lord Balfour, one of the lords from the House of Lords in England. He makes this famous Balfour Declaration. He writes this letter, And he says that His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So what's the destiny of this piece of land now that the Ottoman Empire fell apart, it dissolved? We're going to be giving the Jews a homeland over here. Step number two, this turns into the British Mandate for Palestine that was adopted a few years later by the League of Nations, which is kind of the previous version of the United Nations. The League of Nations say we accept the Balfour Declaration, and that is indeed what is our intention over here. There's a mandate for Palestine to create a Jewish state over here. A few years later, 1949, or sorry, 1948, even 1947, the UN actually goes ahead and acts upon that promise and says, yes, we will go ahead and they made the UN partition plan, calling, it was much more limited than the plan of the League of Nations. The partition plan did call for a state for the Jewish people, as well as a state for the Arabs, an Arab state as well in the small area. And what happens is, shortly after that, the Jewish people in Israel declare independence. And within no time, all the countries of the world, over 160 countries, accept Israel as a country, including America, including the Soviet Union. And the UN takes them in as a member state. So really, that's basically the quick rundown. And if I lost in any of those details, it's okay. The details are not that important. You could go online and watch lectures on all the details of Israel's right, legal right, under international law to this land. But that is basically a quick rundown. So what gives legitimacy to any country? Not much, But if there's anything that gives legitimacy to a country, Israel has more than any other country. That's really the truth. More than any other country, the Jewish people have that backing. That is the next thing that the Declaration of Independence says. Let's read it in text 7b. Would you like to read, Debbie? All right, page 13, 7b.
This right was recognized in the Balfour Declaration of December 1917, and reaffirmed in the mandate of the League of Nations, which, in particular, gave international sanction to the historic connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and to the right of the Jewish people to rebuild its national home. On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The General Assembly required the inhabitants of the land of Israel to take such steps as were necessary on their part for the implementation of that resolution. This recognition by the United Nations of the right of the Jewish people to establish a Jewish state is irrevocable.
Okay, this is the international law argument. Okay, what would maybe be some of the weaknesses of this argument? What do you say? Go ahead, go for it, Max.
If you're depending on a UN general resolution, they could always pass a different one.
Ooh, okay, there you go. Unfortunately, we've learned all too quickly that the UN is not such a reliable friend. So yes, they did give us some recognition and that legal basis, but if our entire claim to Israel is, the UN said, you know what else the UN said? The UN said a lot of stuff, right? 2016, they passed the resolution that Zionism is a form of racism.
That was earlier.
That was earlier? When was that?
They revoked it on the date itself.
In 2016. So when was it? What was it passed, that resolution? Anybody?
60 sometime.
Oh, really? Oh, you're right. With Herzog. The current president, Herzog's father, made a famous, he tore it up. You're right. Yeah. But 2006 was something else. Oh, that Israel has no right to the West Bank. The occupied territories are. Anyways, the UN, the point is, UN is not a friend, right? And if we're relying on the UN to give us legitimacy, we're kind of in big trouble. So let's put that up over here. If we're relying on the world to give us support, well, what if that same world changes its mind and says Jews have no right to be there? So this is a bit of a shaky argument to be on. Very good, Abby. Learn from Sheldon. Take some refreshments.
Yeah, Rabbi, quick question.
Yes.
If you happen to know, when in 47, when the UN voted, in favor of creation of Israel, did the Arab countries vote for or against?
Okay. Eli is asking, what did the Arabs vote in 1947 when the UN had this vote?
So not all of them were independent, so not all of them were able to vote.
Not all of them had voting status in the UN.
Those who had voting status voted
Those who had voting status voted no, pretty predictable. The real miracle of that moment was that the Soviet Union voted yes. That was really what happened. Once you had America and the Soviet Union, what was that?
It's the last time they ever agreed on anything.
It was the last time they agreed on anything. It's considered a miracle. It's considered a miracle that the Soviet Union, the very Soviet Union who then went and supported all the Arabs to destroy Israel. So it's right. This is one of the miracles if you want to look from that perspective. Okay, that's this argument. Argument number two, and this is the weakness of it. Like, come on, you're relying on international law. You're relying on the world. Okay, here's argument number three. Yes, you have a question?
The League of Nations existed at that time, and in 1922, it's called the San Remo Convention, where the League of Nations adopted the Balfour Declaration into international law.
Right.
And then when the United Nations was created, they adopted all the previous League of Nations provisions into the United Nations charter, basically. So it's not just that the United Nations has changed their law. All the countries that are part of the United Nations have agreed to it as international law.
Right. So you're right. It's not so simple. And as the Declaration of Independence itself says, the end of this text, that it's irrevocable. This is not something that you could just turn over with another voting. It's more difficult than that. But the point is, the point remains.
Right.
Is our whole claim simply that the world told us that we have the right to? Well, today they're all saying you don't. Okay. Anyways, I'm not saying that any of these counter arguments are correct, but just it's good to, if you want to be real about this and honest about this, it's good to also weigh the other side of the perspective. Let's move on to number three. Number three is an emotional argument, the argument of Jewish survival. And this is the third argument brought in the Declaration of Independence. The argument is simply that having a sovereign state is absolutely crucial for Jewish survival. And the argument goes that we've been around the world for 2,000 years. There's not a single land which we have not lived there and been persecuted there, slaughtered, expelled, all forms of destruction, of murder, of killing, of persecution, of suffering. And yes, there have been lands that we've lived in and we've had golden ages. Jews lived in Spain and have enjoyed the famous golden ages of Spanish Jewry. Jews have lived in Italy and had golden years in Italy. Jews have had great years in Poland. But at one point or another, anti-Semitism showed up, as it always does, predictably, and those golden years very quickly fade away. And that's this argument. We cannot rely on anybody. And this especially came to a head in the shocking events of the Holocaust. Not only did we suffer under the Nazis, but the silence of the world, the fact that the world, America, was not willing to bring in Jews who wanted to escape, who were able to escape, who were on boats which wanted to escape. Same thing happened in what was then Palestine. We've realized that we cannot rely on anybody. We cannot rely on anybody unless we have our own sovereign state, with our own government, our own army, that we could be there to protect and defend the Jewish people no matter where they are. That is this argument, the Jewish survival argument. Let's read that in text 7c. Stuart, page 14. Here we go.
The catastrophe which recently befell the Jewish people, the massacre of millions of Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency of solving the problem of its homelessness by reestablishing in the land of Israel the Jewish state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the Comity of Nations.
This is the basic argument. There's more to be said about this. That really, this also goes back to the very roots of Zionism, to Theodor Herzl. One of the key motivations to the Zionist movement was trying to answer this problem, the Jewish question. How do we get anti-Semitism to stop? And okay, but this is the argument, which is, again, it's not coming from a legal perspective. It's not a historical perspective. I think this is more of an emotional argument. Jewish survival. We need this for Jewish survival, or else. Let's talk about the weaknesses. Any weaknesses?
I would say one of the
Sure.
strengths is possession.
Strengths is possession. Okay, explain yourself.
And then, by possessing the land, it's ours. And it may be a reality point to the legal argument.
Right,
Hey,
you're saying
we
we're here.
legally have it, but we have it because we live here and it's ours.
Right, okay, but
And
the only
that
problem
is
is,
certain about of survival, but it's also we possess it.
right, so that's maybe part of the legal argument. I'll say a comment about that a little bit later in today's class, but you don't even have that much more time for. Okay, but let's talk about the weaknesses of this argument, of the Jewish survival argument. Okay, Max, go for it.
Why there? The
Oh,
Palestinians were not the people who perpetrated the Holocaust, so why?
so you're saying 2 points there, very good. Number one is, okay, you need a land and call a sovereign state. Why here? Who said it needs to be here? Who said it needs to be here?
Start.
Find another place to go.
Reference argument one.
Oh, reference argument one. Okay, but at the same time, and this goes to the next point that Max just mentioned, somebody else lives there currently. So I understand you once lived here, 2,000 years ago you lived here. The last time we had independence here was 2,000 years ago. That's a very long time.
As you suggested, there are always Jews there.
There were always Jews there, but not in control, not a Jewish state, not Jewish sovereignty,
Majority of the population.
and definitely not a majority. That's
Give me
correct.
the counter-argument.
Go for it.
If your objective is survival, you couldn't have picked a worse place.
Oh, very good. There's another one. Oh, you're looking to survive, and where do you go? To the very worst neighborhood on the planet? Oh, here we're gonna survive. What? Bad, right. Bad call there. Bad call. And the argument goes, why not Uganda? Why Uganda? Because if you look at history, Theodore Herzl wanted to make a Jewish state. He was negotiating with the British monarchy, with the British government. And before Israel, they suggested to him, we give you a piece of land that we are currently, colonializing, whatever, in Africa. Go there. And Theodor Herzl actually was strongly inclined to that idea. Jewish state, who cares what it is? It can be in Argentina. That was another suggestion. It could be in Uganda. In the 1930s, Stalin made, what was it called? The Birobidzhan? Birobidzhan. Yeah, all these Russian cities. We're all getting very familiar with the Russian and Ukrainian cities now, right?
Rabbi?
Birobidzhan, yeah, very east.
Rabbi?
Why can't it be there? So these are. So we're saying over here 3 points. Why there? Number two, you want to survive? Bad location. And let's add another point, another counter argument. Who said best interest for the Jewish people is to be in one place? Concentrate all the Jews in one place? That's the good thing to do. That's very scary. That's putting you strongly at risk. Right?
Rabbi?
And look, so one moment. Look at the 6-Day War. How many Jews were there? Close to 2 million, if I'm not mistaken, 1 point something. And all those Jews were under threat. And the Arabs themselves were saying, we don't think anybody's going to survive. 2 million people killed. Can you imagine that? And today we're looking at the Iranian threat of a nuclear attack. I'm saying, God forbid, but having 7 million people concentrated in one place is a little bit scary. Maybe actually it's best for Jewish survival, spread us all around. And whenever the next anti-Semite shows up, next tyrant wants to kill us, at least he only has a small population to deal with, but at least we're all over the place. We could survive somewhere else. And the third argument, which Max mentioned, okay, we didn't do the Holocaust. That's what the Arabs could say, Palestinians could say. We have to give up our land for somebody else's atrocities to you? Why on our dime? We have to lose our, I understand you want to survive. Okay, that's your problem. Well, I need to give up my land. As we say in Yiddish, auf jedem's cheshbon, on someone else's account, on someone else's dime. So these are the weaknesses. This is a Jewish survival argument. And the weaknesses are, why is the land of Israel? Greater concentrations may be actually a greater danger to our survival. And number three, okay, that's the reason why we need something. Why does the world need to give us this? These are the three arguments. With that, we conclude the three arguments. Whew, how are we doing? What would you say? Are these the sum total of these three arguments? Are they solid? Are they strong?
They're strong, but there are counter arguments.
There are counter arguments, but let's put it this way. I don't think there's a single other country in the world that has such good arguments for their survival. How many countries could say that we have this tremendous thousands of years ancestral bond with this place? Very few places. You look at England, so you say, look, the monarchy is there for hundreds of years. So who's the monarchy? Current monarchy, and right? How many years did she just celebrate? How old is she? I'm not following.
75 years as queen.
75 years as queen. So people think, wow, look, they're there for a long time, but they're actually German. The current monarchy are German, right? And they've conquered it from who? From the Anglo-Saxons or from the Normans?
The Anglo-Saxons were the Germans who came in the 600s, 700s. Before that were the Celts.
And there's the Normans and then the Romans, and each of them are conquering it from each other. So come on, everybody's conquering it from everybody. We have 3,800 years of history. Who else could ever show that? You know, I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and that's a pretty historical place. There's a famous bridge there where George Washington crossed over, and that was some big moment in the War of Independence. And I don't know exactly. And there's a battlefield park. There's a big battle in Princeton, Battlefield Park. You know, it's not like here, you know, Bloomfield Hills. You know, how many years ago was this place even? You know, a few decades. You know, so in Princeton we have a few hundred years of history. Okay. But Israel, thousands of years. Which other country could say that? Which other country could say that they have such strong international legal backing to their existence? China? Oh, really? China and Japan?
I mean, China and Japan.
What do you do for a living?
No, I'm just thinking Japan is an island. It's got the advantage of having been an island. It's people.
Oh, so you're saying it's just
Nobody's conquered.
you know, even think about the fact, you know, so now we're thinking about it again. Even think about the fact that a few years ago, Russia invades Crimea, and the world breaks out in this tremendous hysteria and raises a cry for like a sum total of like 10 minutes, right? How long did the international, everybody made a little bit of noise and okay, you know, life moves on. And which other people could say that the survival of their people is dependent on having this land? So there's no question, putting all these arguments together, it's a very strong argument, the sum total of it. No other nation, no other country could say that. You know, there's over 190 countries have been conquered. Over 190 countries today, their existence is through an act of conquest, including us here in America. We all know that, right? It's okay, we're proud of it, okay.
In possession.
And it's okay. And as you said, possession, you got it. So why won't the world accept us? There's a lot of conflicts right now in the world between borders. And everybody's like, okay with it, you know, okay, you know, fight it out. Whoever wins, you know, big deal. Like Israel's just like, it's if you think about it, it makes no sense. We're the world's biggest problem.
Along with that, what other country is constantly being questioned for its existence?
Right, exactly. Which other country, and this goes back to your point, you know, possession, you know, which other country would just, the world will never accept that we have the right to be there. So, you know, what's wrong with these arguments? So yes, there's counter arguments, but come on. None of these counter arguments make Israel weaker than other countries. So that's one question. Why will the world not accept these arguments? But I want to ask a more fundamental question. And we have 15 minutes left. We're going to try to do this in 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. In general, I try ending on time, besides when I don't. But no. I make an effort, but if we need to make sure to capture what we need in the class, I'll go a little bit over. But I really try to respect your time. I try. Okay. The world, for some reason, just won't take these arguments. There's something that just, there's like a little thorn in the eyes of literally the entire world. They're like, yeah, you have all these good arguments, but no, we still just won't accept you. We just can't take it. But I want to ask a different question. Do we as Jews, from our perspective, look at these three arguments and say, yeah, that kind of explains why we Jews care about Israel, love Israel, go to visit Israel, support Israel? I don't have time for that joke, you know, support Israel joke. Okay, for next class. We got 6 weeks here. Got to save some of the jokes. Do these three arguments capture our feelings for Israel? No. Partially. How partial? 50%, 75%, 90%? Something less than 50. You see, these are the arguments given. These are arguments given in the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, this is it. This is the end. This is the reasons why we have the right to be here and exist and self-govern.
Rabbi,
I want to go through with you a few ideas, a few sources on what Israel means to us as Jews. And I want to then think through with you Are the arguments that we've just gone through, do they capture this type of relationship?
Yeah.
Let's turn to the beginning of our texts. Text one. Text one, a biblical text.
Yeah.
The book of Daniel. Daniel is a leading government official in Babylonia. This is a brief period, the 70 years when the first temple is destroyed. Jews are exiled to Babylon. Daniel's there. This is what it says in the book of Daniel. Toby, would you like to read?
Sure.
Text 1, page 2. We're jumping earlier. Okay.
Upon learning that the decree had been written, Daniel went to his home, where in the upstairs room there were windows open facing Jerusalem. 3 times a day he kneeled and prayed and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done beforehand.
Sounds familiar? This is 2,500 years ago. And what's Daniel doing? He wants to pray to God. There's a decree written. We're not going to get into the whole history of that. And he looks to the window that's facing Jerusalem. And today, number one rule of any of building a synagogue is what direction? You got to face Jerusalem, face east. So we face east here in America. If you're in Russia, you face south. If you're in Africa or Yemen, you're facing north. If you're in Australia, you're facing west. Did I get that right? Okay, something like that. The point is, and if you're in Israel, depending where you are in Israel, every synagogue in Jerusalem faces a different direction, depending where you are in relation to Temple Mount. We face Israel. So for us here in America, we're the Jewish diaspora, the Jewish exile from the land of Israel is close to 2,000 years old, and we're still always facing Jerusalem every single time when we pray. We're praying to God, we face Jerusalem. Okay, that's point number one. In our prayers, there's no doubt about it. If you simply go through the daily Jewish prayer liturgy, and you start counting, what are the key themes in our prayer? It's a lot of things we repeat. There's a lot of repetition sometimes. We're saying a lot of the same themes over different ways. What the number one theme is, bring us back to Israel. Number one. No, there's nothing else that's on a higher priority list in the Jewish prayer than bring us back to Israel, rebuild the Holy Temple, bring Mashiach. It's all that same theme, Israel. Let's do just one quick example of that. One of the prayers in the Amidah, text 2. Larry, would you like to read? Text 2, page 2.
Sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise a banner to gather our exiles. Gather us from the 4 corners of the earth into our land. Blessed are you who gathers the dispersed of his people, Israel.
Okay, next example. We eat a meal, we break bread, because that's what we Jews do, right? What's a Jewish occasion without a little bit of food? What do we do in this time to say the grace after meals? Who made that translation? Grace after meals? Okay, it's a funny translation of the Hebrew. Birchat hamazon, a blessing after food, grace after meals. Okay, grace. Okay. So, huh?
It's a glacial word.
Yeah, it doesn't sound, okay. I don't think we're the ones that gave that translation. Text 3a, this is the very first thing. This is how we begin the grace after meals every single day. Remind me your first name again? Shana, that's right. Yes, text 3a, page 3.
By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept as we remembered Zion, on our harps and willows in its midst. For there our captors asked of us to sing songs, our tormentors insisted on joyful tunes. Sing for us of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the song of God on foreign soil? If I forget you, O Israel, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cleave to my palate if I do not remember you. If I do not recall Jerusalem at the height of my joy.
Look at that. We're just eating a little bit of bread. We're having breakfast. But we remember that we're mourning over Zion. And this is a psalm, one of the chapters, one of the songs in the book of Psalms that describes the Jews leaving Israel for the first time, the first destruction from the Babylonians. Very, very emotional, and there's a whole story behind this. We're not going to get into it now. On and on and on. We're starting to see this theme. This is not a little detail of Jewish culture, of the Jewish religion. This is front and center. We invoke Israel, Jerusalem, the destroyed Holy Temple, constantly in all of Jewish life, in our major life events, in around the year, the major events of the year, just to go through this quickly. We're having a wedding, we're under the chuppah, and before we cheer out Mazel Tov, the groom goes and breaks a glass. The glass is broken to remember the destruction of Jerusalem. There you have it. God forbid somebody passes away at Shiva. What is the Jewish, the Jewish traditional wish that we wish somebody in a Shiva home? May God console you among all the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. One Jew dies, but we can't forget. We're really all mourning together over Zion and Jerusalem. Pesach, right? Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. That's like the climax of the event. Yom Kippur, the exact same thing. At the very end of Yom Kippur, if you made it all the way till the end, you didn't go down to eat some bagels and cream cheese a little bit early, okay? What do you say at the very end of Yom Kippur? Same thing. Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. So this is, again, front and center. We're constantly mentioning Jerusalem. Another point, Jews throughout the ages, despite tremendous hardships, risked life and limb and any chance of financial stability just to go to Israel, and spent months and months and months and all their life savings just to go to Israel. Somebody once asked me, why did the religious Jews never go to Israel, and why were the Zionists the first ones to make Aliyah to Israel? I was very surprised by that thing. I'm like, just look at history, and this is in your books. If you look on page 6, the history is rich with Jews who did not have the resources, just going to Israel and literally going to live a life of poverty. There was no financial infrastructure to support hundreds of Jews at a time going to Israel, and there were it was terrible just to be in the Holy Land. Maimonides himself rules that one should go visit Israel. And if you can't visit Israel in your lifetime, you should be buried in Israel. And that's what Maimonides did. Maimonides dies in Egypt, and he asks them to schlep his body all the way up, and he's buried in Tiberia in Tiberias. I've been at his. Let's read that in Maimonides. Text 4, page 8. Richard, right?
Right.
Okay, text 4. I'll get it all down, Pat, by next week. Text 4, page 8.
The great sages would kiss the boundaries of the land of Israel upon arrival, kiss its stones and roll in its dust. Indeed, it is written, your servants cherish her stones and favor her dust. Although one cannot compare being received by the Holy Land during one's lifetime to being received by it after one's death, nevertheless, the greatest sages would bring their dead to be buried in the Holy Land, as can be learned from the example of our father Jacob and the righteous Joseph.
There you have it. Throughout the ages, we've made Aliyah. This is a picture from 1915, 1932, 1934, another Aliyah. This is the Jews from Yemen in 1949, right after the establishment of the State of Israel. This is the Jews from Georgia, the Gruzinia Jews from the former Soviet Union, 1974. And here's a tomb of Maimonides, beautiful tomb in Tiberias. And what does Maimonides say? He lived in Egypt, but he got buried in Israel. Let's read one more text just to bring this home. From another great sage who lived just around the time of Maimonides, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He was a great poet. Let's read what he writes. Now, I want to give you a drop of context. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is not living in Europe, and he's not living through the Crusades. He is a top government official. He's part of the upper echelons of Spanish society. This is a top guy. He had nothing to complain about in his life. He was wealthy, we know. He was very, very successful and accomplished person. And he writes these words. Text 5, Max, page 9.
My heart is in the east, and I am at the ends of the west. How can I taste what I eat, and how could it be savored? How shall I render my vows and my bonds, while Zion is yet in the fetters of Rome, and I am in the shackles of Arabia? It shall be as easy for me to forsake all the bounty of Spain, as it is precious for me to behold the dust of the desolate abode.
This is very, very descriptive. How can I taste what I eat? I'm in the shackles of Arabia. This man was wealthy. Again, he's a top government official. He's a doctor. He's high up there. He's a philosopher. And what does he say? I'll leave all this behind just to go to Israel. And he did that. He went to Israel, and right upon arrival, he died. Some say he was killed. This is Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. You can go to Israel. He visited the tomb of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He immigrated to and is buried in Israel. So this just captures a little bit, not just the nostalgia, but the love, the connection. This is very passionate, it's Very deep, the bond of a Jew with Israel. Now let us go through these three arguments. Do they capture it? We have historical roots to Israel. Does that kind of, give enough legitimacy, enough backing to this form of nostalgia and love and just to Israel? It's historical? No. Jews, by the way, are not that nostalgic of a people. We had great time in Spain and we left and it's okay, We're not running back. We're not nostalgic for Spain. We had great hundreds of years of comfort in Poland. Okay, we left, we're done. We had a Jewish kingdom in Khazaria. Look up the history, fascinating thing. We had a Jewish state in Khazaria. Started around the year 700, 800, the Khazarians who all converted to Judaism, fascinating story. We're not that nostalgic, we moved on. History is not really what makes the love story of the Jews. International law argument, does that at all explain this phenomenon that we've just studied? Not at all. This is hundreds of years, thousands of years before any international body is giving us legitimacy. And same thing for Jewish survival. Are we nostalgic for Israel? When you look at this flavor, this feeling that we're describing here in these few texts, does Jewish survival kind of explain this form of nostalgia and love? And the answer is no. So where we're getting to, took us an hour and a half to get here, is that all three arguments we've said until now are actually not what it's about. They're nice arguments, they're good, but if we're going to be real with ourselves, why are we taking this course? What is the spirit of our connection to the land? Everything we've said till now has nothing to do with that. Nothing. These are arguments it's good to tell the world, to tell the nation, tell the people that argue with us. But what are we doing here? Nothing to do with this. So what's really going on over here? What's the real Jewish claim to Israel? Okay. Can I go a little bit over time? You'll cut me a few minutes slack for the first week. We'll make this painless, all right? Quick and easy. We'll peel it out. No. What's the Jewish claim? So let's go. Let's talk a little bit about what's a Jewish claim to Israel. What's our real connection to the land of Israel? Okay, well, we all have a Torah, the Bible. Now I sound like a rabbi, no? I'm gonna say a Dvar Torah now. Okay, don't worry. The Torah begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which sounds like a great place to begin because, you got to start somewhere and that's the beginning. So start at the beginning. But in fact, there's a very big question amongst Jewish thinkers, among scholars. That's how you begin the Torah? That's a bad opening. Why is it a bad opening? Think about it. The Torah is a book of law. That's really what it is. The Torah is a book of law. God is telling the Jews what his plans are, what he wants from us, what he expects from us. And here we go on and we start saying these stories, history, how the world started, who the people were. There's Adam, there's Noah, there's great floods. Who cares? It's great history, but it takes the Torah a book and a half or a book and a third. Only 12 chapters into the book of Exodus. That's a lot of chapters, lots of words, until you get to the very first law. The very first law that was given to the Jews in the land of Egypt while they were still slaves was to the law of making Jewish months. The Jewish calendar, Jewish months. So the question goes like this. Start with the law. History, keep for the appendix. That's the question. History is good. Keep that for Deuteronomy. Law, that's Genesis. Start with the law, and they'll fill us in with all the other nice stories a little bit later on. Why begin with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth? You like that question? That's the question. It's a question. What's the answer? Here's the answer. Our sages gave us the answer. And Rashi, who is the number one commentator of the Torah, tells us what the answer is. This is the very first commentary of Rashi, which is basically the classical flagship commentator on the Torah. Let's read Rashi. Text 8, jumping around a little bit, keeping you on your toes. Text 8, page 15. Lance, would you like to read?
Rabbi Yitzchak said, the Torah ought to have begun with the verse, "This month shall be to you." The first mitzvah commanded to the people of Israel. Why then does it begin with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth? The strength of his works he related to his people, to give them the inheritance of the nations. If the nations of the world will say to Israel, you are thieves for having conquered the land of the 7 nations, Israel will reply, the entire world is God's. He created it and granted it to whomever he desired. It was his will to give it to the 7 nations, and it was his will to take it from them and give it to us.
So Rashi says, and this is the answer, Rashi. So Rashi, I just want to get, Rashi lives 1,000 years ago, just about. He's quoting Rabbi Yitzchak, who lived 700 before him. So this is a commentary from 1,700 years ago. This wasn't written 10 years ago. 1,700 years ago. The rabbis say, you're right. The Torah should not have begun with the story of Genesis. Genesis should have been not in the legal department, it should have been in the history section of the library. The Torah is a book of law. What's the history doing in law? Or you should put it in book number 5. There's only one reason why God decided the Torah should begin with the story of Genesis, and that is to give the Jews an answer. Whenever anybody comes and challenges them, you are thieves. You don't belong in the land of Israel. First of all, these are pretty prophetic words. When the nations of the world will say to Israel, all the nations, the entire world is challenging Israel. That's what's happening today. And what does Rashi say? We have to appreciate this. This is how the Torah begins. Number one lesson of the Torah is you got to know your birthright. You got to know your right to Israel. So I have 2 questions for you. Why is it so important? Would you really say the number one priority in Judaism? You got to know Israel. In the modern age, especially post-Zionism, there's no question about it. That's what started happening culturally. But from a religious perspective, is this really like the number one thing in the Jewish religion? Israel, you got to know how you claim to Israel. Number 2 is the story of Genesis goes on for a long time. We have all these other stories. Only the book of Exodus do we get to the law. But if you look at it, the entire book of Genesis, if you look at it carefully, is really the Jewish people's title, our deed, our claim to the land of Israel. It's a theme that happens the entire story long. God creates the world with purpose. God creates Adam to start a human race, to fix the world, to make the world a better place, whatever God's vision is for the world. A few generations down the line, in times of Noah, the world is totally corrupt, is totally failing. Whatever God's plan was, God says, Control Alt Delete. Let's reboot this whole system. Starts again, comes finally Abraham. Abraham, here's my man. And says, okay, I'm going to give you the mandate to change the world with you and your family. And every step of the way, Israel's part of the narrative. God's first time he speaks to Abraham, he says, Abraham, you got to leave your father's home. I'm taking you to a different place. Brings him to Israel. As soon as Abram shows up to Israel, God says, you see this land? I'm giving it to you and your children. There's a famous covenant, the Bris Bein HaBesarim, the covenant between the parts, where God makes a covenant with Abraham. And God tells Abraham, your children are going to go down to Egypt and they're going to be enslaved in Egypt, but they're going to come back here. The 4th generation of Jews will come back here. Isaac, again, it's all about Israel. Isaac, you're getting Israel. Jacob, the story of the 12 tribes. Israel is front and center. When God appears to Moses in the burning bush, God doesn't just say, I'm going to liberate you, right? It's all about, I'm bringing you guys to Israel. What we're seeing here is, it's not just historical fact. It happens to be that the birth of the Jewish people and the place where the Jews developed their culture happened to be on this little piece of land, which is in the Middle East, on the east side of the Mediterranean. Okay. It's not like a footnote. It's not just the historical fact, this is where it had to happen somewhere, so this is where it happened. We're saying this is like very deep. Judaism is tied with Israel totally. Our entire birth, the entire Genesis, is really the claim of the Jewish people to Israel. Why? Because God gave it to us. And even more than that, even the Jewish religion. So you could say, you could be a religious Jew in America. You could do mitzvahs in America. I've got news for you. If you live outside of Israel, even if you wanted to be a perfect Jew, do everything, you are living a handicapped Judaism. Judaism was designed to be done in Israel. There are 613 commandments in the Torah. How many do you think fall away if you're not in Israel? 613. Do you lose 100 commandments, 200, 50, 10? If you are out of Israel, out of 613 commandments, you're left with only 270. Your whole Judaism literally gets sliced in half and more. And our sages say, Judaism is meant to be done in Israel. Let's read text 9. Remind me your first name. Charles?
Chuck.
Chuck?
Yes.
Chuck. Text 9, page 16.
The sages of the Talmud declared anyone who lives outside of the land is comparable to one who has no God. As it is written, to give to you the land of Canaan to be a God for you. For all the mitzvot of the Torah were given primarily to be fulfilled by those who dwell in the land of God.
Judaism was designed to be done in Israel. Why? I don't know. But Israel is so central to Judaism. To the point that most mitzvahs you can only do in Israel, and our sages say the ideal fulfillment of Judaism is in Israel. Okay, that begs the question, why don't we literally go tomorrow morning and get the airplane, we're out of here. What are we doing here? Okay, lesson 5. Why are we not all doing mass aliyot right now if this is literally how Judaism is? Lesson 5, but the point, we have to appreciate this concept. One last text, and I think this captures it. We just read the text, the poem from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Let's read another text from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, page 35 in your books. It's actually one of the appendix readings, but we're going to read it. Page 35. This is a dialogue between the Kuzari, the king of Khazaria, not a Jew, and the rabbi. He says, what's up with the land? Why do you call it a holy land? And I think this captures the essence of what is the Jewish relationship. What is every single Jew's relationship with Israel? Text 16, page 35, Alan.
The Kuzari, you speak of a godly people in a godly land. Regarding a godly people, the meaning is clear to me, but the idea of a godly land is difficult to accept. The rabbi, it should not be difficult to see how one land may be unique amongst others in a certain respect. There are places where particular plants, metals, or animals are found, or whose inhabitants are distinguished by their physiology and character. The Kuzari, but I have not heard that there is anything special about the people in the land of Israel in comparison with other peoples. The rabbi, how about that hill on which you say that vines thrive so well? It will not produce choice wine unless one plants grapevines in it and does all the necessary vinicultural work. The first thing that is required is a people with unique qualities. Then the land and the action taken in it, in this case the mitzvot tied to the Holy Land, which can be compared to the cultivation of the vineyard, will also play a part in their greatness. Yet, unlike the grapevine, which could conceivably produce grapes in other locales as well, the chosen people can cleave to the divine ideal only in this land.
Let's unpack this for a second. Champagne wine, champagne grapes are only if they are from Champagne. They'll sue you if you call wine champagne and it's not from Champagne, right? True story? Okay. A Jew's soul, the proper climate for a Jew's soul, the way God designed nature is in Israel. This is a very deep soul connection. That's what we're saying over here. I want to conclude to you with 2 small anecdotes. We're going to close tonight's class. Many years ago, I watched a documentary about the 6-Day War. And I forgot what it was called. It was an in-depth documentary, and they interviewed one of the soldiers, one of the paratroopers, who conquered the land of Israel and liberated the Western Wall. And he says his entire platoon, whatever it was, none of them were religious. Very secular Jews, real kibbutzniks, real secularists. And they come to the wall. And I believe that he was maybe the commander of his unit. And one of the soldiers goes over to him and says, he says, I want to pray. We're here I want to pray. He says, no, go ahead. No one's stopping you. We're here. We just liberated. Go and pray. He says, I don't know how to pray. He says, just say the Shema. Say Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel. He says, I grew up on a kibbutz. We were like secular. I don't know the Shema. So the commander who knew the Shema, he says, okay, cover your eyes and repeat after me. And he says, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. He says, and I see the secular Jew who has he's not religious. He says, his Shema Yisrael at the Kotel was more impressive. It was holier than the biggest saint's Shema Yisrael in Yom Kippur. He says, you watch that, that was soul. That was soul. And as well, when they liberated the wall, so Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister, he was the mastermind behind the victory. So Moshe Dayan also was very secular. He did not want to conquer Jerusalem. And he said, what do we need the Jewish Vatican for? We need all this ancient stuff. We don't need Jerusalem. Move on. We don't need the Jewish Vatican. But then, finally, it was a last minute thing. We're going to talk about in lesson 3. They go out and they conquer Jerusalem. They liberate the wall. And he walks through the gates. And he tells the photographers, take pictures. This is a historic moment. The guy who said, well, what do we need the Jewish Vatican for? And we have the famous picture of him walking through the gate, entering the old city. And he shows up to the wall. He's visibly emotional. And he right away says, tear down all these houses. We're making a plaza right here. I want all the Jews to be able to come here in just a few weeks for the holiday of Shavuot, for the next major holiday. You can't help it. Israel is the place where the soul of a Jew is meant to be. It's essential to Judaism. So Israel is not a detail. It's not that it happens to be that in 1948 we needed a homeland, the case we found our ancestral homeland. It's not history. It's not international arguments. It's not even that we need a place to survive. This is very deep. It's very real. It's central to Judaism. And if I may add, if we want to talk about the practical survival of our nation in our homeland, we definitely need to look to Judaism. This is way too important. Judaism has a lot to tell us. This is very critical to Judaism. So how are we going to deal with the nations that argue to us why they need a land? Okay, that's a separate discussion. In lesson 6, we're going to talk a lot more about anti-Israel bias and anti-Semitism. But we need to, as Jews, if we want to be able to defend Israel, we need to know why it really matters to us. And if I may say, the number one thing that's needed in Jewish education today, I think both for the youth, even for adults, is not just to do it just because, we're pro-Israel. Why are you pro-Israel? Because. There has to be that conviction. We have to understand why we want it, why we need it, why it's ours. And if we understand why it's ours, then we can go to the world with conviction and explain to them why it's ours. And with that, we conclude. Next week, let's start the war. We're going to talk about the ethics of preemptive strike, something that haunted Israel for years, for decades. Talk about the ethics of it, the practicalities of it, how do Jews fight wars. The war is beginning next week. But for right now, here we have it, the Jewish critical land of Israel. Thank you all so much for joining. And I want to just tell all of you, especially those of you on Zoom, it was a little bit difficult for me to see you on Zoom. I see all of you, but we weren't as engaged as sometimes we are. This course is not meant to be a lecture. Yes, I'm talking and we have what we want to cover, but let's make it interactive. If you have any questions, if you have thoughts, if you have feedback, email me, call me. And God willing, we're going to have a very enjoyable learning experience over the next few weeks. So thank you all for joining. I look forward to seeing all of you next week. Right here, God willing, the security guard will be here, so it'll be easier for you guys to sneak your way in, to break your way into the Jewish Federation. Okay.